That's going to cost you money. We charge 50 Rand for this recording. For what it's worth, I think you can get this on video, can you? Okay. Again, good evening, everybody. We've got a three-man presentation today. I'm going to start talking about mainly the first phase of this Khaya land reform project. Leon will then continue with a discussion specifically about Alexandra, which is a very, very interesting case study. And Perry will then talk about the trials and tribulations, the ups and downs of actually working at the coalface on this project. So, in the beginning, I think Leon had this crazy idea in about the 1990s, early 1990s. Now, Leon's got a sort of laser vision about sort of things, so what everybody else sees all their lives, he suddenly comes up with and says, but this is what we've got to do. And his idea was very simple. Let's normalize home ownership for all South Africans. At the time, South Africans, as you know, were split. The blacks, by and large, were living under very socialistic conditions. Very few of them owned their own houses, especially in the real South Africa. And when the new South Africa came about, he suddenly realized that there was a major step that had to be taken to convert all these houses to normalize South African. So the concept is to convert all black occupied council owned, and bearing in mind that it was council owned land that we're talking about, so it's a socialistic system, to full ownership. In the end, that the ownership of everybody in South Africa would be freehold, regardless of your color of your race. And my favorite expression these days is that all good ideas eventually degenerate into work. And this one undoubtedly did. It's stuck. Just going a little bit over the theory, it's often been said by some of the economists that South Africa and apartheid was really a situation where whites were living more or less under a capitalistic society and blacks were living under a socialistic society. In other words, blacks couldn't own their own houses, couldn't start their own business anywhere they wanted and so on, whereas whites could. We had a visitor, an economist called Walter Williams, who came to South Africa, and he wrote a book called South Africa's War Against Capitalism. And in it he pointed out how the blacks were living under a socialistic state. For those of us who are free marketeers, property rights is probably the most important fundamental right of all. If you really start to think about it, no other rights can be held unless you have a property right. Even freedom of press, for example, if you don't have the right to a radio station, to a TV station, to whatever, you won't have freedom of the press. So the most fundamental right of all is property rights. And this is what blacks did not have in the early 90s. It also is a very nice situation where it's feels good that you have a security situation. Property owners feel much more secure in their own property than in property that is owned by the state. It gives them pride. And most important of all, it actually gives them a situation where they are bankable. Now, when we started this project, most of us were quite naive about the financial situation, where we thought that once somebody owned their property, they would be able to mortgage it and use that money for something else. In actual fact, what the banks told us was that was just by the way. The most important thing is that these people who become owners of property become bankable in a much more broader sense. So they can take out insurance policies, they can get cards, credit cards and so on. And that to them is probably the most important thing. About past one. Some of you have probably heard of this concept of debt capital. A Peruvian economist by the name of Hernando de Soto is the person who probably popularized the idea. He wrote a book in which he discussed in detail called The Mystery of Capital. And his whole economic academic life has been on discussing both the informal sector and property rights. His proposal is really very simple. He wants to not only transfer wealth but legalize the wealth. In other words, it's not good enough sort of like to live in a house and have it. It's got to be legally yours. And at that stage, you have got a situation where you transfer dead capital to so-called live capital. He wants to make the assets that people own liquid and therefore transferable, and they can sell it. I'm going the wrong way. As far as the big picture is concerned, I want to emphasize that nobody really knows how many houses we are dealing with here, how many houses there are potentially that could be transferred. Some estimates are between 5 and 7 million. Whether it's 1, 2 or 3 million or 4 million, it doesn't matter. There are a lot of people out there who are living in houses and don't own them. And that's what our project is all about. We have had discussions with a particular sponsor to do a land audit to try and find out what the real situation is. But for the purpose of this evening's discussion, I'll just use the figure of 5 to 7 million. If you look at the numbers of the 5 to 7 million and you value each house at about 100,000 rand, that means that the assets that could be owned by blacks are 500 to 700 billion rand. If the 100,000 goes up to 120 or 130,000 rand, you're talking about 1 trillion rands worth of dead capital that can be transferred to the tenants. It's got to make an enormous impact on this economy one day, and of course on the lives of the people. Interesting enough, the cost to transfer is relatively small. It's only 2%. I mean, 10 to 15 billion rand is still a lot of money, but it's relatively small. If we assume that the 5 to 7 million houses each has 3 people, and some people would say 2, or some people would say 4 or 5, you're talking about 15 to 20 million people that could be affected by this hand transfer of property to them. And that's something like 30% of the population. As I said, all good ideas degenerate into work. So, in the early 1990s, we tried desperately to try and get somebody to sponsor this concept. I know that I went with Leon to a number of sponsors, and it was very, very frustrating. We had these sponsors who were really, really the top CEOs, the top entrepreneurs in the country, and for some reason or other they didn't understand what we were talking about. I know that I can remember one particular person who I would have thought would have picked it up within 5 seconds, asked Leon at the end of the thing, please will you send me a one-pager simplifying this whole project. I think the problem was that we'd been living it for so many years that to us it was second nature. I've described Leon and myself as probably the worst marketers in the world, simply because it's got to be a project that people should see straight away. Anyway, we persisted, and eventually FNB decided that they would sponsor the project, and in particular sponsor a pilot study. Paul Harris at the time said that there are 2 ways of going forward. One would be to try and go globally, nationally, the whole country, and he says he didn't believe in that. He said what we've got to do is we've got to start small, learn from that, and grow and grow. And I think that's probably the right way to have done it. So a pilot study was started in Ngwathe. For those of you who don't know where that is, it's the metropolitan inverted commas area of Parys. So why did we choose Ngwathe? Well, the story is very simple. That's where Feldman enters the story. We were having a chat one day, and he said to me, you know, I've got some time on my hand and I'd like to get involved with land reform. So I said, well, okay, and I discussed with him Leon's idea of the transferring property. He said, well, okay, let's set up a meeting, and he and Leon had a discussion. And Leon said to him, well, go back and speak to some of the people in Ngwathe and Parys and get some information about titles. He went back and he said, no, there's no problem with titles. Everybody's got their titles and it's all okay. Leon had experience along these lines and said, I actually don't believe you. Get me 10 titles and let's have a look at it. So they had a meeting, reviewed the 10 titles, and as I recall it, not one of them was genuine. They were, as I mentioned here, election related, meaning that they'd been promised to some of the people to say, you own your house now, but 3 months after the election, it's only for 3 months before or after the election or something else. I don't remember the exact wording, and maybe you can ask Leon, he'll give you the exact story. So that was the background in Ngwathe. The actual pilot study itself, we decided to do 100 houses. I may be a little bit generous by saying it took 2 years, maybe took a few more years. During that period, we did some research, and I think the most important part of that research that I can recall is that 30% of the people said that they were prepared to pay their own transfer costs. In those days, it was about just under 2,000 Rand. And we're still working on that, what we call self-payment. We'll talk about it very briefly later on. The problem was that we were working in Ngwathe and nobody knew us. In those days, Perry had initiated the subject, but he wasn't working full-time on it. We decided that if we were going to go forward, we had to have some sort of memorandum of understanding with the council, and that took probably 6 months from the time of initiation till the time we got it signed. And we had to deal with the whole issue of clearance certificates. As you probably know, when you transfer property from one person to the other, there can be no debts. You can't owe the local authority anything. We sort of cleared that up by saying that the debt would become a civil debt, but later on we learned that even that wasn't necessary. The launch took place 3.5 years ago, September 2013. And interesting enough, Ace Mokashula, who was at the Free State Premier, noted that this was exactly 100 years after the 1913 Land Act. We hadn't thought of it, but he brought this up. Also interesting enough was that at the day before the event, we got wind of it that the Premier didn't want to come along. He was told it wasn't the right thing to do, or whatever reason. And somebody said to him, "Don't worry, Perry's going to be there and it's okay." So he came along. I've got a few pictures then showing the... That's Ace Makashula handing it out to a lady over here. Leon standing in the background. The launch took place. We actually had a big tent in the area where the pilot study had taken place, so we could walk from the event through to the houses. It was really a very moving event. And that was in one of the ladies' houses. Ace Makashula giving her the title. What are the lessons that we learned? Well, by far the most important lesson we learned of all was that you have to use local conveyances. Unfortunately, we didn't know that at the time, and FNB said, okay, we're sponsoring this thing. We have this relationship with some Joburg-based conveyancers. We'll pay for them, and they can sort it out. Now, you can imagine that every time there's a problem in Parys or Ngwathe, it takes you an hour and a quarter to drive there, an hour and a quarter to drive back, and 2 hours there. So it's a whole day just to sort out one little problem. Apart from the fact that they didn't know any of the people there and they didn't contact. So we've now learned, if there's lesson number 1, 2, and 3 is use local conveyances. There's also to a large extent a degree of big town versus small town mentality. And I think that that's the other thing. And then we finally learned that the clever thing to do would be to use Perry, who is very well known there. Okay, so where we got from there, we started, as I said, way back in, that's 2008, having initial discussions, getting sponsorship and so on. We then ran this pilot study, and in 2013, we transferred the first 100 houses. The next year it was 350, then 760. Last year it was just under 3,000. And in 2017, only in month 3, we only hit 5,000. So I'm hoping that I'm going to have to do another graph one day to a smaller scale to get to the total there. Ngwathe has something like 30-odd thousand houses, of which initially we thought 17,000 were eligible for transfer. And I think that Perry, you now decided it's less than that, 11 or 12 or something like that. And he'll give you more detail about that. This just is an indication of where we're operating on at the moment, and Perry will be discussing this in more detail. We started, as I said, in Ngwathe and Parys in the Free State. Lady Brand is a potential place. We've had some discussions there. We haven't started there. We've just got some funding for Louw in KZN, and we'll be doing that this year. In the Eastern Cape, we've got funding for Graafrenet, and the same funder is funding Stellenbosch. In the Western Cape, we've got Grabouw, possibly Naarden and Cape Town. We started in those 3. The subtlety here is you see a dotted thing around there. It's potential and solid is definite. Northern Cape is Berkeley West. You'll be talking about that, Perry?
Yeah.
Okay. And in Gauteng, we've got Alexandra, which Leon will be talking about, and we've just got some funding for 100 houses in Vosloorus. It's very nice that it's a spread, but it's damn difficult because every time you go in there, you've got this initial probably 6 months, maybe 9, 12 months period of getting to know the people, setting up the MOU and so on and so forth. I've also put on here 2 other areas that we're working on. One is companies. We've been talking to a number of companies, and we've eventually got one of them to say that they will do a pilot study for us to try and get their own staff who don't own their houses through this project. It's great. If more companies could do that, it's another way of funding it. But the problem is that most of these companies have staff who don't live in one area. So if they live on the East Rand, they may be living in Ekurhuleni or Joburg or whatever. So we're going to have to deal with that issue. But I think it's very important that we could now get a company under our belt. And then there's the whole issue of self-payment. If you remember, I said the research was carried out that there was something like 30% of the people said that they would do self-payment. We're going to be pushing this more and more. We've already started some self-payment at the moment. I think we've got up to, 40 or 50? 40 people doing self-payment in Parys. But I think that that's the place that we've got to push it. We've got to explain to people that for 2,000 Rand or whatever it is, they can get a property that is theirs and will be theirs for value of about 100,000 Rand. And then the last story is, these are our sponsors. We started off with FNB. FNB introduced us to the Renette Foundation. That's Rupert. Christa Vis, you may have seen some of the articles that he has been one of our champions. He came in and he supported supporting the project. He then introduced us to these organizations over here, which these 3 are already on board. We've got 2 a day, Elgin. They're the biggest apple farmers in the country, and they're in the Grabo area. These 2 people are but they're from Sweden, eh? Huh? These are 2 Swedish entrepreneurs. This is the guy, Thunder Lodge, who's supporting the Shishlui one in KZN. And then we've got some farmers, individual farmers. This company over here, these people over here are doing the one in Berkeley West, and unions. Directly are the self-payment individuals and Rotary in Parys are doing some work. One of the individuals, which I love the story, is a lady who lives in Cape Town, who every month pays for one title to be transferred. Estate agents, we've got some of the banks and some of the big property companies, Home Choice and Cashbuild. So that's the story of the sponsors. Bearing in mind that 3 years ago there was that one and that one over there. So it's grown quite a lot, and it's a full-time exercise trying to get these people on board. If we can then quickly move to Alexandra. Leon's going to talk about this. So soon after the pilot study was carried out, FNB said to us, look, Ngwathe is important, it's a pilot study, but we would really like to do something closer home. FNB, being the head office in Sandton, said, we sit here in Sandton on top of these 20-story building, and we look across at Alex, which is one of the poorest places. In Sandton's one of the richest places. This is just not good enough. So they said, we want you to do something. I can remember very clearly that I know about this from Leon having told me, that we said to them, guys, you can't do it. It's too fraught with political problems. We said it's totally impossible to do it. And it was much too complicated, there are too many people involved. Well, this is where Leon enters and tells you how he managed to pull this off. It was really a remarkable feat. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Leon now. Trying to get rid of this thing.
Well, just press this. Oh, you should have been on the thing.
I want to stay up on that. Okay. Do you want the? Are you
yes, I'm going to say a few of the big picture things before I telescope in on Alex specifically about some of the aspects of this that have perhaps a sort of philosophical bent. And I'm stuck behind this thing over here, which reminds me that when Raymond Ackerman was once being introduced, some of you know the story, the guy introducing him couldn't remember whether these are called lecterns, rostrums, or podiums. And he said, would Mr. It was Mervyn King actually, please come and speak from the rectum. Well, ever since then I've decided I'm not going to do that this evening. and I'll speak from the platform instead. What is interesting is people often say to us two things. They raise two issues. One is this land reform? Now, the definition of land reform in South Africa, I want to immediately say and encourage everybody to realize, and I'm not going to be polite about it, it's a hoax. Because what happened is that it was said over time that 30% of the land needed to be redistributed or restructured or transferred to black people. And nobody ever knew what that meant. What is 30% of the land? Does it mean the land by area? Does it mean the land by numbers of properties? Does it mean the land by value? Does it have anything to do with the nature of the land, urban, rural, whatever? And then eventually Minister Ngwathe said, well, actually what it really means is the land means farmland. Okay, so now we know farmland. Well, does that mean all farmland? Does it include the former homelands? Does it include government land, whatever? Then eventually he said, well, actually what it means is white commercial farmland. We still don't know as we speak today whether 30 or 40% means by number of farms or whether it means by area or whether it means by value. We simply have no idea. This number floats around. People think it has a meaning. It has no meaning. But let's assume it's 100%. The value of all white commercial farms in South Africa is about 90 billion rand, which is half as much as the run-over cost of one power station, Medupi. It's nothing. It's actually a hoax and a fraud. To say if that's what you mean by land reform, then it's a fraud and a cheat on black South Africans. There's something like 30,000 white commercial farmers. If you're very lucky, there'll be 30,000 black commercial farmers out of a population of 40 or 50 million black South Africans. And they will be getting something worth less than the overrun cost of one power station, worth half of that, in fact. So it's worth virtually nothing compared to the GDP and capital formation in the country. And what's more, the farms that have been acquired have not been redistributed. No black person has one of them, not 1 acre. They've simply been nationalized. They belong to the state. Black people, if they're lucky, are put there as tenants of the state, and the ghost of Verwoerd walks around the Department of Land Affairs with a big smile on his face saying, if I'd known the ANC would implement my land policy of depriving black South Africans of land, I would have handed over power long ago. That persists to this day. Now, so when people say, oh, no, I actually don't have a view on it. I don't take a view. Actually, what happens to commercial farmland is really, it's emotional and so on, but it's of no great economic significance, nor is it of great transformational or empowerment or abolishing the legacy of the past significance. What matters is urban land. What matters is residential land. What matters is commercial and business land. And the one thing that I'm saying is I'm not actually interested in land redistribution or land reform. That is not what we're talking about. We are talking here about doing something extremely simple. The most evil and worst thing of the crime against humanity, apartheid, was that black South Africans were not allowed to own the land on which they lived. 20 years after apartheid, that is still the case. The Natives Land Act is supposedly withdrawn, but it still applies. That is still the basis on which most South Africans live to this day. And as far as I'm concerned, the next thing that people raise is this land reform. I say, and it's not land reform. It's actually just entering on a piece of paper. It's paperwork. It's admin. Is to say the land that you occupy is in fact yours. It's just saying it's yours. And they say, but you can't give something for nothing. I was told this, for example, by Helen Ziller. And we say, no, we're not giving anyone anything. We're giving them a piece of paper that says it's already theirs. That's all. This is not a giveaway, a transfer, a redistribution or anything. This is simply administrative paperwork to say that the land you occupy is in fact yours now. And the apartheid idea that you are a tenant and you're not an owner is now being abolished, finally, gone. That's all it is. But it is, as you see, worth something like R1 trillion. Now that's a big number. I can't imagine R1 trillion. I don't know what that means. But the best I can do is point out that that's about the size of our annual budget. and it's about 1/3 of our GDP. In other words, the country's economy can have 1/3 added to it by some paperwork. That's all, just filling in forms and registering in the deeds office. So what happened in Alex specifically is that it was a problem, and I'll just explain why it was a problem. It's the most important township, as we call them in South Africa. That also, by the way, is a travesty of language. They're not townships or locations or settlements. A township is this is a township where we are now, Bryanston. It's proclaimed as a township under the township laws, under the Deed Registries Act. Those are laid out and sometimes surveyed, sometimes not, sometimes in the deed registry, sometimes not, but essentially the people living in what we call townships, and I'm going to use that term now because everyone's familiar with it. It's technically inaccurate, but let's stick to it. The people living in what we call townships are people who live under a kind of house arrest. Now, this is what happens in places like Alex, but everywhere. That is to say that if you are not found in the place the government put you, and that according to it is where you're meant to be, you are there illegally, and the property can be and often is repossessed. And then you've lost everything. So people live under permanent state of insecurity if they don't stay where they are told they have to be. That is 20 years after apartheid. And I often think to myself, as I'm speaking to you now, I think what I'm saying is so crazy, it's so obviously nonsense, that I'm going to wake up soon and find I've actually had a dream, and I'm going to say to my wife, you know what, I had a really crazy dream that 20 years after apartheid, black people still didn't own their land. And she'll say, yeah, that's the kind of thing that happens in dreams, just things that are just obviously absurd. So I kind of think, can what I'm saying actually be true? And I truly think that there is a possibility that I'll wake up and find this didn't actually happen at all. This event was, in fact, in a silly dream of mine. Now, in Alex, the position is this, that Alex was one of what was called in the old days a black spot, a swart kol. That is to say, an area in what was defined as a white group area, under the Group Areas Act, in which black people owned land, full freehold, normal title of the same kind you get in what we call white areas. Now again, there are no white areas and black areas anymore, but I'm going to, for shorthand, talk about it that way, what you might call predominantly or historically or more recently or whatever, RDP, whatever, are they black or not, but nonetheless, a bit of shorthand, we'll just call them black and white areas. In so-called white areas, as you drive away this evening, you look around you, and the properties all around you are 100% lawful. Everything there is lawful. The people are tenants or owners and mortgaged, and they have no insecurity. Nobody can take their land away. They can buy it, sell it, let it, develop it, have it rezoned, run businesses, whatever. When you drive past, if you go out past Diepsloot or past Alex is the one we'll telescope in on, you look at it and you say, I know there's something different there. What is it? It's not quite the same. And the reason is the land is not owned unambiguously, freely, completely. You are there with a pre-emptive clause or with a 99-year lease, or you're there with some or other one. And by the way, the former DG of Land Affairs, Jeff Budlander, wrote a book on land title in South Africa along with another land expert, and there's no chapter on black occupied or held land. And when I said why, I said because when we reached 100 different types of title and tenure, we gave up. We decided it can't be done. So to this day, there is no book that describes or has any legal description of the forms of title and tenure under which black South Africans occupy or hold but do not own land. So what we have said is, we don't care what the past is. We don't care what one of those 100 or more forms of tenure and title is. Just convert the darn thing to ownership. That's it. Just don't ask whether it was settled, who settled it, when, how long, whether it was expropriated, whether it's a lease, a permission to occupy, a formal, informal. If you don't plan to move the people away, issue a title deed, a real, full, unambiguous, completely freely tradable, mortgageable, lettable title deed, the way you see in white areas. So Alex was a black spot, a swart kol. Alex was, as they had, the black spot removal program was one of the programs under apartheid, which was basically to expropriate all of the land owned by black people in white group areas, Alex being one. 1968, the land was all expropriated, became the property of the Johannesburg City Council, like Soweto, Dobsonville, and so on. And black people shifted from being owners to being tenants. The problem in Alex was that the owners had all themselves become landlords, and an average of about 3 or 4 tenants per property in Alex. So there are something like about 3,000 properties in Alex, and there are about 10 to 12,000, nobody knows, these numbers are all just informed guesses by people who know a lot, 10 to 12,000 shacks, garden shacks or garden flats. Now the problem you face with this is that to the government of the day, you'd think the easiest thing in the world that is politically popular, you'd think the way to get votes is for the ANC or the DA or whatever it is to say, or IFP in some northern KZN properties. We politically, I'm not interested in the politics. As I like to say, I think the only person who ever went to Parliament with honest intentions was Guy Fawkes. So I'm not interested in the politics. So what happens is that they you'd think would say, let's just give them all title deeds. That'll get votes, right? That's what Ace Magashula did in the Free State, and he didn't realize what he was handing out was phony documents. He thought he was giving people real title deeds for the election, but they weren't, which we found out. Now they can't, because for every owner, and there are 2 associations, the Alexandra Property Owners Association and APOR, the Alexandra Property Owners Rights Association, ALPOA and APOR. They are called, after 1968, to this day, they or their descendants are called owners. But they aren't. They're tenants of the Joburg City Council. And the people who live on the plots, Alex is old middle-class houses, little brick houses with verandas, pretty little places that was just developed. It happened by a property developer called Papenfuss. And so it was just a normal freehold title property. And then they had these tenants in the shacks around the original house, which is still the case to this day, most of them. And the problem is that they're 4 to 1, roughly, 3-4 to 1. In other words, more of the voters are what to this day are called tenants than are called owners. So the political imperative is not to upset the tenants, and in the process to alienate the owners, who've had marches on the Tuli House and Toitoid, and I've been a part of them. I do a mean Toitoi as a Mlungu, for those of you that want to see. And one of them was quite interesting. Outside the Tuli House, President Zuma was there, looked out the window and said, "What's Louw doing with these Alex property claimants?" So as a result of him literally seeing out the window, I was invited up and met with the then Secretary General of the ANC, and he said, when we explained to him what it was, he said, "Sort this out. Fix it," Well, unfortunately, it wasn't so easy because of the issue politically that the people, many of whom are illegal foreigners and so on, the kinds of person Herman Mashaba is now getting upset about, like Donald Trump, about foreign immigrants, illegal immigrants, but nonetheless, there they were. The city council said, our voters are not the land claimants, and therefore the land claimants can't get their land back. Since then, we've had a long process of meetings with lawyers, the Alpoa and Apol lawyers at Spoor and Hogan Lovells, and us and the council's lawyers and the Alex Renewal Project and the province and the national department and the city council, and there are lots of role players. And then there's Sanko, the South African Civic Association, which basically thinks of itself as representing what are called the tenants, and the two property owners associations represent what are called the owners, even though technically no one is an owner. So the deal eventually reached, and I guess this is what Terry means. I try to apply some creativity to it. Others did too. So no, no, I'm just a role player. I'm just one of the people in the process. So I don't want to have an exaggerated view of my significance in this, other than that I don't give up, and I don't want to go to the grave until all black South Africans have title deeds. That's what I won't. I'm not going to relax till that's done. And I need lots of other people with lots of expertise. Now what happened is we came up with 4 solutions, which was lots of bargaining, lots of difficulty, who has the option, who decides. And a deal was signed under Parks Tau about 6 months before the local government election, and that deal has now been taken over by the DA, Herman Mashaba, who so far hasn't been able to implement it the way Parks Tau didn't, and whoever does implement it, I think, is going to be very politically popular. So if Herman is listening to me, then he should really get on with it, and the way to get on with it is to ask me to go and see that it happens. That'll be the solution. So what the deal is this, that if it's uncontested, in other words, there are no tenants claiming the right to remain there, then the deed gets issued immediately. Full title deed, no argument, no cost, no anything, free. Actually paid for by the council. We don't even need a sponsor, FNB or anybody. If it is contested, in other words, the council has politically sensitive tenants that have to be gotten rid of, then one of 3 options presents itself to the owner. The owner can take cash instead, a cash compensation, which very few want. And you know, it's interesting, often I hear this sort of racist idea that black people don't appreciate land ownership or don't understand it or haven't had it, from black people, not old white right-wing supremacists or whatever. The Ngwathe ANC council, for example, said to us, but if you give them deeds, they will sell the land and become homeless and become indigent, and they don't appreciate land ownership. That's why we can't just give them land, and them and they. And I, this white Afrikaner guy, had to say to them, what do you mean them and they? You wouldn't talk about white people like that. So I played the race card for once in my life, and it worked, and they were embarrassed. And I said, you don't want a different solution for black people. You don't want some diluted, compromised form of title. Do the full Monty. And so in Alex, they want the land. And if anyone thinks black people do not appreciate or understand the value and importance of land ownership, come with me to Alex to the next meeting in the community hall. Jane, sitting in the back there, has attended one of them, and she can testify as to what a moving experience it is. And you can ask for compensation, and that gets negotiated. The valuers come in, and the council will pay out the valuation. Alternatively, you can enter into a sectional title project. Property developers and architects and urban space planners are involved, and they will come in and say how you can turn this into a proper little formal sectional title unit, where you have the original home and the plots around it become now properly formalized, and instead of a tin shack, as somebody said, people will go home with a tin of paint instead of a bottle of brandy. The other option you have is another accommodation somewhere. In other words, the council offers you something else somewhere else. Maybe in Alex, maybe somewhere else. And the fourth option is, I think that's all 4. The one is you get the property if it's uncontested. The other is a sectional title plan. The other is compensation. And the 4th is alternative housing. That's the deal that's been signed. Binding contract, now in law, that has to be implemented. So we have, in a sense, at least on paper, solved the problem of Alex, which seemed politically completely intractable because the politicians would not come out, and Sanko wouldn't allow them to come out with a solution that in their view, compromised the rights of the tenants. And so the problem is now solved, and now it's a case of implementation. And the reason Herman Mashaba has to give us a call, our former friend and chairman, is that officialdom will not do this. Someone else has to do it. We have to do it. We have to go and do the work. Why won't officialdom do it? Is because officialdom loves the control and the power they have over people by controlling their housing. What official is going to get rid of the opportunity to take bribes and give political favors and practice patronage by deciding who does get evicted, who does get repossessed, who does get a house, who doesn't get a house, where you are on the internal queue for RDP houses or reallocation of repossessed houses? So officialdom, the self-interest of the people that the councils depend on to bring about land reform, they will not do it because it doesn't suit them. They get a lot of power, a lot of kickbacks, a lot of privilege. What's more, if they're no longer managing the housing of black people, what job would they have? What would they do? So as far as they're concerned, this is their income, their job, their profession, their status, and we have to actually go and do the work that should be done by officialdom. That is where Alex stands at the moment, and when you drive past Alex now, at least you can look at it and say, it's not going to look like that much longer. Slowly it will start transforming into a place in which people start replacing corrugated iron with bricks, and where people go home with tins of paint instead of bottles of brandy is soon going to happen in the most important township in South Africa, the birthplace of the structured ANC, soon. And we are very proud to have been role players in that process.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want a point on it?
Well, if I need it, yeah. Good evening. I'm Perry Feldman, not very well known, but I'm the guy who lives in Parys. My background is I'm a farmer, ex-farmer, now I'm a gentleman farmer. I've got a lock up and go farm. And this is what I now do, and together with my wife, this is what we spend our time doing. And that is enabling black people to get title through the Khaya project. It's become an absolute passion with us, and it's what I do, as Veronica, my wife, says, 24/7. She doesn't know that I do anything else, and it sometimes upsets her. But let me carry on from where Terry ended off. Terry was supposed to speak till about 2013. I just want to show you one of the things. This was Mrs. Mololochi, and I'm going to give you pictures and I'm going to tell you stories. I have no philosophy about me whatsoever. This is Mrs. Mololochi. She got a title from Louw, and that's what her house looked like when she got title. We went back a year later, and that's what her house looks like. And now, where do you press? That's where the wall ended, and this was added on. Now you go inside the house. It's plastered. It doesn't have then it didn't have ceilings. It might have now. I haven't been there for a year or so. And then I asked her, Mrs. Mololochi, you had the bricks. What stopped you from building? She said it wasn't mine, and I wasn't going to build until it was mine. And you know, we get asked this question so often. Why you have to? How do people know that they need title? And Leon uses this expression all the time, and I find it such a racist idea. Because we don't go around knocking on doors and say, have you got title? I can give you title. People come to us. They know that there's an office that functions, that will process applications. And they come and they want title. And why do they want it? They want it, as Terry said, for pride, security. The last one is bankability. as much as we like to say that it's bankable, for older people, this is low on the totem pole. But pride and security, and that is absolutely essential to them. So the next thing, sorry, I've got to get used to these things. Okay, so now we have applicants. And as I say, this is stories. This is Mrs. Ellen Chabalala. At the time, she was our oldest beneficiary, 101 years old. She knew she had to apply for title. Nobody did it for her. She had to, because she had to go to the office to sign it. And because she was 101 years old, when I received the application, I see the IDs, and we fast-tracked it. We spoke to the deeds office and we fast-tracked it. And from the time of her signature till the time she got her title, it was 3 weeks. And that was for the hard copy in her hand. But, now I need to boast, she turned 101 years old on the 7th of July. And our eldest granddaughter turned 21 on the 7th of July. And she's sitting in the audience very quietly, and she handed over the title. So, and one of the things that we're seeing that's so important for us all is to understand that it's all very well us sitting here. We're all old, I'm an old guy, and so what? But you need to get youngsters involved. You need to get young people into areas where they've never been before and are not likely to go. Because why should they? And this is part of what we're doing here. You saw that chart with Christo Visa, with Carl Semelli, all the big guys, Home Choice, all these people, with who are millionaires and etc. and who can give 100 titles at a time. But what we must understand is that there's a whole bunch of small sponsors, people like you and I. In Tumohole, we've now done about 1,200 titles. Of that, 150 are done by individuals. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, something like that. There are some people that have got given a quarter of a title. There's one guy who puts, I think it's about 200 rand a month. Every month it comes in. And every 9 months he gets a title. In 10 months he gets a title. So for any of us to say, oh no, but this is beyond me. This is only for big guys. There's not one of us here that can't participate in this kind of project. And then I've also got to add, we were talking about politics. This is Joey Michelle. Now Terry loves telling the story. Is how I was thrown out of the first meeting with her. She is the mayor, and she has been the mayor for the last. This is her second term of office, and she was the reason we managed to get going in Tumohole. The previous mayor needed something to help it along, which we weren't going to do. And but when I came to the first meeting, I wasn't accredited, so she threw me out, and she brought it up today, and we had a handover today, and she brought up the fact that she can remember when she bad named me, as she said, and she threw me out of a meeting. So I can phone her up any time of the day or night and say, Joey, I need you tomorrow for a title, and she will be there. And we understand it clearly. This has got nothing to do with politics. Whether you're UDM, PAC, DA, ANC, there is nothing, it's got nothing to do with politics. In fact, we have another little protocol in Tumohole. When we have handover ceremonies, we have councillors, everybody, and sometimes we have 100 people at a time. The one protocol is you can wear what you like, but you're not allowed to wear a party t-shirt of any description whatsoever. And she sticks to it to the letter. And that's the kind of example that I use. And we lucked out in Ngwathe. It happened to be one of the easier areas to work in. And one of the reasons it is so easy to work in is that we've got a lawyer in Parys who did something that the big guys in Joburg couldn't find out. There's an act called the Upgrading of Land Tenure Rights Act of 1991, which makes it it's an imperative. It gives an obligation to councils to transfer land to the tenants. In theory, the occupant, the person who's registered as the occupant of a stand, doesn't even have to apply for the title. He doesn't have to sign anything. If the title can be given to them, if there's finances available, that person can receive the title without ever having gone to an office. That's what this act says. The other thing it says is that there is no such thing as a clearance certificate. They use something called a section 113 or 118, whatever it is, and you park the debt. You can owe 50,000, you can owe 10,000, you can owe nothing. But whatever the debt is, it gets parked and it gets handed over to the new owner, who is the same person as the tenant. Nothing changes. But what does change is when the property is sold again, because then you're going to have a situation where you're going from a registered a title holder to a title holder, and then the rules are all the same. For us as whiteys, which we've always known, then you need your clearance certificate, and you can't do transfer until you've paid the council. So we've already had one of the offshoots of this project in Parys. We have two examples of people who've sold. The one sold for something like 85,000 rand. He owed the council 20,000. The money went into trust. He got 65,000. The council got 20,000. Everybody went home happy. And the council got money they never had a chance in hell of ever getting. Another guy, and this is one of these issues that Leon speaks about, being under house arrest. Without title, you are under house arrest. You can never leave that place, because how can you sell it? You can only sell it informally. And there are countless stories, and if we had time, I could tell you stories about those kind of deals. But so we had one case where a woman got her title. She sold her house for something like 110,000. And why did she sell her house? Because older people don't really sell their houses. But her kids lived in Klokwe. They wanted her to go and live with them. So now it's easy. She sells her house. She pays the council. She leaves. She's got capital. And she goes and lives with her child. A normal, everyday happening. But pretty unique in a township. That doesn't happen every day. And that's what Khaya is doing. Part of what... And I've got a new thing about what Khaya does. It normalizes a society. It makes it the same for everybody. We had a handover today. 100 titles were sponsored by Home Choice. Actually 200, but this is the second 100. Home Choice in Cape Town. And we did 50 in Tomohole, which is in Parys, and we did 50 in Fredefort, which is, for those of you who are old enough to remember, that was where you used to go to Cape Town through Fredefort. And one of the problems in Fredefort is that there are some coloured people there, and there was an area called Vredeshoop, where we had 9 applicants for title. And we sent them in, and nothing's happening. And eventually, I asked the conveyancers to find out what's happening, and they found out that it's stuck in the deeds office because these stands they're all on the Surveyor General maps, but the project was never completed. So the consolidation was never completed. So there's no mother deed. Now you can't transfer an earth if there isn't a mother deed. Am I right? So I spoke to Home Choice. I said, look, I can replace them, but I don't want to, because these people are then never ever going to get title. Who's going to do it for them? Who's going to go through these hoops of the consolidation and make sure that the council does it? Because now it's got to go back to council, and the council has to complete the project. And who's going to make sure that it happens? Because if we take those 9 people and we replace them, we're consigning them to never ever having title within the foreseeable future. I mean, in 100 years' time, something might happen. But I know that in my time, nothing will happen, because nobody will ever do it. And there's one thing I've learnt in this business, and I call it a business because when you work hard at it, is if you have to be a fox terrier, you must never let go. And that's what you become. You become, as Gail would say, you become a nag, and you become a fox terrier. And when things look like they're never going to happen, you just stick around, and eventually they happen. And the same thing in Tomohole. There were a couple of people who applied for title whom we couldn't process because there was a problem with the zoning. So we're fixing up the zoning. But we can only do that because Home Choice said, fine. We're part of this thing. We want a normalized society. It's not only a question of just giving title. We want a normal society. And how are we going to get it? If we have the opportunity, we must do it. And that's what they're doing in Fredericksburg. That's part of, and that is something that is so crucial to this project, that we eventually, hopefully, Ngwathe might have 100% of people titled if we get enough money. And we will title them because we won't allow an obstacle to stand in our way where we can't give title. Because all of these things can be resolved with a will and time. Okay, now this is Mrs. Chabalala. Now you can see her decently. Sorry, hang on, wait a minute. That's her eldest daughter. She's 82. She's damn sight older than I am. So this daughter is the one who eventually built this house. It's a very nice house. And it was a moving experience. As Mrs. Chabalala, she told her grandson to tell us, she says, nobody's ever done anything like this for us. And that was from a sponsor, an individual sponsor, not a multimillionaire. An individual sponsor brought that kind of satisfaction to that lady there. Then we go to the big guns. There's Christa Wiese and Patricia de Lille. But you look at this and you say, hey, that looks nice. But how did we get there? Christa Wiese gave 100 sponsors, 100 titles for Parys and Cape Town. And in Cape Town, there's all sorts of problems in terms of the fact that they have a lot of subsidized housing. Most of their housing, over 90% of the housing there is subsidized housing. And in Ngwathe, we speak of self-built housing. This is very crucial to understand. Mrs. Chabalala built the house herself with her own money. No government help. Not 1 cent. So there's no help for her. Nobody helps her because she's done it all on her own. These people here all got subsidized housing. They weren't great housing. This is the stuff that was built in the late 80s, 90s. You know, the old 10 by 6. And they're in Omzamo, on the wrong side of the highway when you go through Somerset West. But they've got a lovely community hall there, and we were going to have this handing over ceremony in the community hall because it makes sense. People are right there. They walk there. It doesn't matter how old you are, you can get there. We've carried people into halls to receive their title, but they've received it. So this was our plan, and we got there, and the hall was in a shambles. Anyway, to cut a long story short, we eventually got, with a lot of fighting, we got the council to fix up the hall. I mean, you can't understand this beautiful hall, and the community couldn't use it because it had been vandalized and nobody looked after it. Anyway, it was fixed. And then because Patricia de Lille was involved, we had a meeting the day before, 2 days before, on the security and all the other kinds of arrangements. And then we heard 2 things. The one was that they'd scheduled an electricity. They were going to cut off all illegal electricity connections in the area. The day after the handing over ceremony. And this ward councillor was an ANC guy, and he was going to have a demonstration. So Veronica and I were having a cup of coffee because we weren't sure where we were, and we got a phone call to say it's been cancelled. And this is the date. This is the date we're having it, and it's going to be in the mayoral parlour. That I still had to confirm it with Christa Wiese and find out if it was okay for him. That didn't matter to anybody. But anyway, we phoned, and he adjusted his diary, and he was there. We adjusted our diaries, and we were there. So that So this is a great picture, but there's a lot of story behind it. And the other thing about it was, also, there was no DA poster there. Ground rule. There are no party political posters in at any of these functions. Jubilation. Now, but the other thing was to get these people there. Veronica and other officials had to be at 5 o'clock. It was raining. They had to go with the buses at 5 o'clock to Nomzamo to register the people to get them to the hall in time. But it was a great function. Everybody was very happy, and and everybody got titles. And as Patricia Little said, she said to the people, "You came in as tenants, you walk out as title holders." And it's as good as it gets. Here's another one of our pin-ups. This is Mrs. Matupi. Before Mrs. Chabalala, she was the oldest lady. She was the oldest recipient of a title. Now Mrs. Matupi still makes her pup in the morning. She can do it on her own. She doesn't need help. Mrs. Chabalala can't. But now again, the small people. Tertia Cook, you see the lady there, the blonde lady in the back there. She has a brother in the UK who has got everything, and she wanted to give him a birthday present, so she gave him a title. And I had a list of people, and when I have a list, I always look for the oldest people, because they're going to die first, obviously. So Mrs. Matupi was on the list. She was top at the time. And we organized the title for her, and she got it in November, and Tertia heard that her birthday was going to be in January, so she organized a 100-year birthday party for her. There's the cake. It's got 100. You can't see it, but there's 100. And what was her comment when she was asked, why did you apply for title? She says, "Niemand kan het van my wegvat nie. Nobody can take it away from me." And this is not only her, everyone that you talk to of a certain age. Youngsters don't have the same feeling of insecurity that we found. Older people have got this terrible sense of insecurity that it will be taken away from her. Now, what's my time like? Oh. I had to go and see somebody a week ago because Rotary wanted to interview some people. And I went to see them before the time, and I said, I went to Mrs. Duniwa, and I said to her, "Can I come the following day and bring somebody just to talk to you about what your title has meant to you?" And I left, and it was it's a normal thing that anybody, you or I, would always do. When I got there the following day, nobody would talk to me. And I said, "So what's the matter?" So the son gave me he said, "Speak to my daughter. Speak to my sister." So I phoned the sister. She says, "What are you doing there?" So I said, "I've come to your mother was received a title from Rotary. Rotary wanted to follow it up, and that's what it's about." She says, "Who are you?" So I explained to her as it happens, we knew each other. She didn't know, and she'd worked a while for us, so everything was okay afterwards. But she was so suspicious that she had come the previous day and came to fetch their title deed, to take it away, because I was going to take it away from them. That is the level of suspicion and the level of insecurity that people have, and we don't understand it. This is Mrs. Ngwathe. Now this was our pin-up lady. She built all those rooms, and she's an entrepreneur. She built the rooms for cash, and this was her legacy for her daughter, who was 11 years old at the time, and she was going to make sure that her daughter would never have the hardships that she had. And she got her title, and she wanted to build a spaza shop and a laundry. I said, "Well, go and get a loan." She went to the banks to get a loan, and they said, "They don't lend on title." I said, "Mrs. Ngwathe, did they ask you for your bank statement? Did they ask you how you're going to repay it?" "No." "Did they say to you that you've got to show us a record that you can repay, because we can't lend on title?" "No, but we can lend if you have an income. And as if your income can service the debt, then we're fine." Did anybody tell you that? And this is one of the big problems I have with the banks. The people at the front are not trained to ask the right questions. I said to Mrs. Ngwathe, "Now establish a bank account find out how much they need to go into the bank account so that you can establish credibility, and then you will get a loan. But unfortunately, I went to visit her the other day, and she died. At the age of 55, she died. There was, you can see her there. There was an example to everybody. I don't have much. I'm just going to go. I just want to tell you about another part of this of the project in terms of farmers. This is Davina Donhauser, whose father is a big farmer in our area. Now, I'm a farmer, and I know the problems and the bad press that farmers have. And it's you only need 1 or 2% in any group to give the whole group a bad name. And this is what's happened to farmers. So they became sponsors of the project and sponsors of their own people for title. She gave a very moving speech at this one handover ceremony, which was this is the picture of their staff with her father in the corner there and her, where they've given, what did I do? Where they've given title to their people. And then you've got this, there's another farmer, what did I do? Okay. There's another farmer, also the same thing, at a Christmas party. And I don't know if you can read that, but it says, "Thank you, Perry and the FMF." I'm not sure that they wanted to say that, but that's what the bubble says. Now, again, in a little boast, we have lots of handing over ceremonies because they're 50s, they're 20s, they're 30s, and everybody, unless it's a self-funder where an individual comes, we try to make it an event. And every single one of these events are events, and they leave you with good feelings. And this is now my another granddaughter with her grandfather, who did well in her matric exams, and her parents gave her sponsored a title in her name. Again, just an example of what an individual can do. Now you see, this is a highlight. This is where it gets good. We signed the MOU in Ngwathe, and now we're at the Droste, and you can't ask for better surroundings than that. But go outside the Droste, and you find a town that has got such scarce resources that they have no capacity. Now we've got to do 1,000 titles in Ngwathe. This has been our biggest problem so far in order to get titles there, because there is no capacity. We've had to sit there. This is what we did in the middle of December in 45 degrees. We went into community halls. We explained to them what the titles were about. Veronica's filling in applications there. Because the lawyers won't use ULTRA, this Upgrading of Land Tenure Rights Act, we hadn't got them convinced yet. We had to do a FICA on everybody. We had a commissioner of oaths. So that was a low point. It's really tough. But we think we're getting back now, and we'll be able to use ULTRA. But this is what we had to do. Stellenbosch, lovely. They've got lovely offices, and it's a well-endowed town, city, etc. And there we had a different issue. The council had contracted with lawyers to do transfers. They had the money ring-fenced for it at the rate of 6,000 rand. We charging 2,000 rand. But they couldn't get that it was ring-fenced. They could do nothing about it. But they didn't have the feet to get the applicants to the lawyers. They didn't have people. They couldn't afford the people on the ground to go to the applicants, fill in the forms, and give it to the lawyers. So Khaya is doing that now. We're paying for that, and we're getting 2 for 1. So I think we did a good deal. Anyway, I think let me just go to that was a home choice handover. I've told you about that. And it's also interesting that this is how we've changed our model. This is the speaker. We use the speaker's office now. We make the local councils do the work. Rising Tide Foundation. This is a Swiss foundation that gave 100 titles. That's Jason Urbach from our Durban office, handing out titles, and the ever-present Joey Moshella, our mayor, who was there as well. And this is in a local hall. So it's all where the people are. There's nothing fancy about any of these things. And jubilation. And just a couple of things here, you'll see. This is where we are now. This is a breakdown. This is what we registered and lodged. 1377. Now you must remember that we were on 100 in September 2013. 100 in 2013. In process, we've got 1323 in process. Additional funds available, and we can't use them at the moment because of problems in the different areas. Graaff-Reinet, you'll see. Stellenbosch, we're busy with them. Cape Town, because of problems, but now Hout Bay, we had a fire. And Hout Bay, in that, they call it the Masakani Bantu area. It's got terrible problems, and we got a Carl Sommelier Swede had given 100 titles for that area, which we couldn't do. But there's a guy I know in Cape Town, and I got a hold of him. I said, "Is there, now that there's this fire, because encroachment's a big problem, people build over the lines and so on. So how are you going to move them? You're going to break down the houses and so on. Is there anything we can do?" And as it happens now, we're going to be able to do. We know of 11. We think we can do over 50 in Hout Bay. So out of a disaster, there is going to become some good. And I want to stop there because I've overstayed my welcome already. Thank you.
Just before you finish, the idea of a gift, individual sponsorship, is really important and very significant. So if any of you are moved by what you've heard or would like to take it further, we do have sponsorship forms this evening which are available, which you can take away and think about it. And think about the idea of a gift. I mean, how many of us are thinking, oh, it's a birthday coming up, it's an anniversary coming up, it's Christmas, and we give gifts that are worth, well, we spend a lot of money on things that are really worthless. So this is an idea of giving a gift to a family member or a friend or someone you care about, which is really going to make a difference to someone's life, a family's life, because your donation of 2,100 Rand could give a family an asset worth of an average 100,000. That's a real gift. So please think about taking these with you. You don't have to do it tonight, but please think about it. You don't have to do it individually. You can take it as a family. 4 of you could band together and give something, because obviously 2,000 Rand is not a small amount in a lot of our household budgets, but please think about it. Thank you.
That, by the way, was Jane Mokolani, who looks after our media.
Oh, sorry, yes.
One of the things we should have done, we've had an enormous amount. We haven't got a document showing all our media coverage on this project, have we, Gail?
We do somewhere.
Okay,
It's
but
significant.
it's very
It's not
significant, the media
translating
coverage.
into sponsorship, so we need sponsorship.
I think that we'll open the floor then to questions. Do you want to stay there, Leon and Eric? A general one or to somebody specific?
Terry, in your introduction, you quoted Renando de Soto and the importance of property ownership as being a source. Well, in fact, de Soto's thesis is that property ownership is essential for economic development. The project as described is really a tremendous one in terms of home ownership and giving people liberty through owning of assets. Is there any follow-up work to show how once a person has title to a property that they've been able to use that for to provide capital for an entrepreneurial initiative?
I don't know anything other than one or two of the stories that Perry told. I mean, there was one lady there who built that lady who died, unfortunately, who built a number of rooms on that she was letting out. Funny enough, I have a slightly different view. To me, it is so obvious that this has got all pluses and no negatives. I don't know that we need any research. If we don't understand that up is up and down is down, that owning property is beneficial for whatever reasons, then we shouldn't be on planet Earth. And even when FMB wanted to do the research for our pilot study, I was a little bit reluctant, but I mean, they were the sponsors and they wanted to do it. You know, you've got whatever the number of millions is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 million people who don't own their houses. If they all own their houses, I cannot believe that more than 1% of them are going to have a problem.
Because
So if you can find a sponsor to do some research, we'll do it with pleasure.
because this really is a basis for total transformation of the South African economy.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
it could be and should be a total game changer.
We've all got a very high level of frustration, I must tell you, is that this chap, the Premier of the Free State, Ace Makashula, who some of you may know for various reasons, by the way, I mean, one of the reasons is is Perry and he are very close, as Perry helped him in the old South Africa, bailing him out and so on and so forth. And the other thing, just how important Perry is, because he's been all his life in that area. Ace has had 2 children who got married, and I think there were only 2 or 3 white couples that got invited to the wedding, and that was Perry. And I say to myself, surely he should go back to his office, clear his desk, or clear 80% of his desk, and spend the other, all his resources and effort on this project. I mean, imagine if you can get, we don't know how many people, how many are in Free State. Say there are 150,000 houses that could be on the whole of the Free State. I mean, what better legacy could somebody have if he's looking for a legacy that's a good one? And I must tell you, we get very frustrated. I mean, the curve of, I don't know, I'm in construction, by the way, and there's what's called an S curve, where you start off very, very slowly and then go up and build and you end up. That beginning of the S curve is probably applicable to this project as well. You go into a new place, like Perry's talking about in Stellenbosch and in Graafrenet and so on, and it's a hell of a battle, you know. Fortunately, when we went into those places, we had money. So we could say to them, look, we've come here with enough money to transfer 1,000 houses. If you don't pull your finger out, we will go somewhere else. You know, we could sort of threaten it. But if you don't have that sort of thing, it's really tough, like taking a horse to the water and making them drink. They just don't want to. It's one day I'm going to write a book on bureaucracy. And the heading is going to be, a photograph of it. I said to all my colleagues that I want everybody who's a bureaucrat to have a name, something stamped on their forehead that says, I'm a bureaucrat. So when you look at them and you talk to them, you think that they're a normal person, you suddenly remind all the time, no, this is a bureaucrat, he's not normal. No. Sorry, let's just go to 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. 1, 2, was it you? 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry, okay.
Hi, it's Khaya from the Times. I just want to say that I'm sure you'd agree with me that politics is everywhere, as it's the master science, so we can't really separate it from this. I want to ask you, would you say that this project is actually aimed at challenging the political rhetoric that we should grab and, you know, what's been said in the media by political leaders, that when we find free land, we should take it? Are you trying to also challenge that by going the legal route?
Can I give you a very unpolitical answer in one word? No. Bearing in mind that we started this project in his mind nearly 20 years ago. There was no talk of that then. None whatsoever.
We started under PW.
Yes, 20 years ago. 1988.
It's much longer than 20 years ago.
1990s, late 80s.
30 years ago.
Anyway, so the point is that you're looking at people who believe in a free market, believe in capitalism, who believe that individuals should have the right to own property and so on and so forth. And when they don't, we will do anything and everything to do that, regardless of politics. There may be some secondary, tertiary aspects to the whole project that you can add on to it, but that's not our primary aim. Sorry, Leon and Perry, you must just jump in if you don't like it. Carry on.
I'm David Ansara, and my question is kind of related to your the previous question around bureaucrats, and also Leon's remarks about these officials that basically act as a barrier to the implementation of Title Ds, because that is potentially a risk to their patronage and their ability to extract rents from tenants. And Perry also made a very interesting remark about that this is by formalizing property ownership, you're actually getting municipalities' potential revenue stream. So in terms of scaling up this project, I mean, I think it's great, the efforts that you've done, but it's quite small in bigger picture of the needs in South Africa. I mean, you need to have political will behind this. So in terms of scaling, I would say that's the way that you market it to municipalities, is to say this is a potential revenue stream for you. Sort out these bureaucrats, and you'll actually grow your revenues.
I just wish that I wish I had belief in that. I mean, you're talking to me, and I'm a fairly rational person. You're a fairly rational person. Just remember, when you're talking to the other guy, he's got a stamp on his forehead, and it just doesn't happen like that. But anyway.
But it's not the norm. There are exceptions. In Graaff-Reinet, as under-resourced as it is, there's a COO there who understands exactly what this project means for his revenue stream. But unfortunately, he just doesn't have the backing, and he doesn't have the capacity to implement. He will use the example exactly what you said. He says, but I've got people who I know can pay, but I've got no lever. They don't have title. Give them title and understand clearly. We're not concerned whether you're indigent or what your economic status is. There are a lot of socialists that say you can only do it for indigents. But if you want to normalize society, everybody must have title. Finished. Those people that can pay, you'll try and get them to pay, but it mustn't be a game breaker. And he says, if these people had title, I could threaten them. At the moment, what can I do? I can't force them to pay. I can't cut off their water. I'm not allowed to.
Just before we get too far from the issue, the question about land transformation and land grab, there's something that I don't think people have got into and understanding. The government is not redistributing any land to black people. It is taking land from white people or purchasing land, and then it is the owner of the land. There's not 1 acre of farmland that has been redistributed. So it's a hoax. And it's whether it's the DA or the IFP or the EFF, whatever, we don't really care. The EFF attended a function, has more than one actually, stood side by side with Herman Mashaba handing over title deeds and saying they're for what it's worth. We don't particularly distinguish between the parties. However, this idea that some people have been given, that the government is redistributing any land at all to black people, is simply a farce. It is not. It is taking the land and turning black people into wards of the state in precisely the model that Verwoerd had as his fantasy. That is what is happening now in South Africa. If indeed whoever gets land redistributed or not. So just to answer, do we want to take away the pressure? No. What we say is, and we are busy working separately, not along with some farmers, the people who have acquired occupation of land that's redistributed, we also want to title that land. So we make no difference. We want the people who have the land to own it. That's it. We don't care whether it's from the old South Africa, whether it's the new South Africa, whether it's redistributed, whatever. But this business that black people can't be owners of land unambiguously, fully, completely, that's what we're trying to change. We're not distinguishing between how the land got to be occupied by black people. We're saying if it is, give them title, regardless of the political origin.
Just to talk about the politics of it, I mean, one of the people who works closely with us is a member of the DA, and about 3 or 4 years ago she had a resolution passed at their federal Congress to support the concept of this project. I happened to be down in Knysna and I made arrangements to go and see. I tried to see the mayor there. Knysna's got a one-man DA majority, and I thought I'd go and have a chat with them. I had a hell of a problem getting to the mayor. Eventually I got through to somebody. Anyway, as a result of going there, I did a tiny bit of research, and I phoned up this lady and I said, what is the policy and so on and so forth. She said, look at if you go under DA and the documents, have a look at page 34, and it's got something on the DA policy on land. Well, it has been so watered down. I can't remember the wording, but you take the trouble to have a look at it. So here you've got one political party that took a resolution to do just this, from the time there till the time it got written up by whoever did it, got watered down, that it bears no resemblance to what we're doing. In my naivety, what I thought was, why doesn't the DA say to every single DA council run local authority, I want you to start doing this now, and in 6 months' time, every month for the next 2 years, I want you to report on your progress and so on and so forth. They don't do it. Don't do it. Now,
if I can add another party, let's talk politics, if you don't mind. The IFP invited us down to come and have a meeting with the TNC, and it now controls various local governments in northern KZN. A resolution was passed, as with the IFP, as with the ANC, as with the DA, to give title. Well, let's see. I mean, this was just 3 or 4 months ago. We hope it happens. But I'm just telling you, it is now official IFP policy in their councils. And also the king of the Zulus, he has said that he wants to give title in the traditional areas. The trouble is that these politicians and bureaucrats, regardless of political party, end up not doing it. It was the decision of the ANC when it came into power. It was meant to have been done in 94, 95.
I'll just give you one little story because we've got anecdotes to from it. Leon wrote a paper, he had an article in the Business Times about 3 years ago, and he gave the government hell for their lack of progress in terms of land reform. And our sponsor at the time, FNB, phoned him up and said, Leon, I think you've gone a bit too far. Please cool it.
I said the sort of thing I've said here tonight.
The very next day we get a phone call from the KZN Premier's office. Apropos of this article, please will you come down to the KZN? Leon goes down to the KZN and our director there, Jason Urbach, go and have a meeting. They walk into a room, there are 20, 30 people in the room, and they get introduced, they've actually just met, they get introduced as their partners in land reform. So they had a fantastic meeting, came out, we all thought that within 24 hours the whole of KZN was going to be, houses were going to be privatised. I happened to be down there a year later on holiday, and I had a meeting with Jason and 2 or 3 guys from the housing department. I came out there thinking, well, okay, Leon buggered it up. Now it's going to happen within 24 hours the next day. A year later I went down again, and the same thing happened. And this is what's happened as a result of that at the moment. But we won't give up. We'll keep doing it. Eventually it'll happen. And bearing in mind, if you look at those graphs that I put up with all the sponsors and everything like that, it's gone from one sponsor, which was FNB, to probably, I haven't even counted the number, probably 30 or 40 different sponsors. So we've always had this idea that it starts as a trickle and hopefully it'll become a stream and a torrent one day. And I'm sure it will happen. I'm sure that these political parties will then be vying for each other to say, to use Leon's quote, why don't we have one man, one house? I mean, what could be a better political policy than that? I'm sorry, we're talking too long.
Thank you for the presentations. I just wanted to better understand the Alex situation, because I've got 2 experiences that are slightly different. The first is the ownership. I don't know whether I should put brackets on that. Previously, my grandfather had 2 stands that he bought, and I've got documents, but they've built flats now on that property.
The council?
The council,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that's the first one. We would like to get that compensation for that, because we can't get that land. And it's based on the fact that that was supposed to be continuous rental for us, or income as you may call it. The second one is where there's another property where the people that were renting decided that they live there permanently. And those are the 2 situations that we have. Is there any way that this could be resolved?
Yeah. Firstly, the ones that they've developed, we were involved with LPOA,
yes,
the Property Owners Association.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember.
I've met them.
You know them, okay?
Yeah.
And we have got a constitutional court interdict against the council doing more of that, because that's what they were doing. They were treating it as their property. They are now interdicted, and they may not do any of more of that. Unfortunately, what's happened to your property is that's what made us bring the application to interdict them and to stop them. So that one, what you have to do is have a claim compensation. We're not really in a position to help you with that because we're dealing with titling, which is the second situation. But what you do have is a compensation claim. And the fact that we were instrumental to interdicting the council from doing more of that certainly helps your claim. That gives you a lot of manoeuvring ability. The second position falls under this contract I mentioned, where the tenants are claiming, what are called the tenants, is what you would have to do there is, as the claimant, you, the owner, or what are called the owners, you have to choose between whether you want to have a sectional title development with them, or whether you want to be compensated, as for the ones where they developed the property, or whether you want alternative housing made available to you. And that you need to get a copy of the contract. We can provide you with one. And again, the implementation of that is meant to be in the hands of the council now. So you would go to the city council's housing department and say to them, you've come, there's the contract, I want to implement option 2, 3 or 4. Option 1, remember, is uncontested. 2 is compensation, 3 is sectional title, 4 is alternative property. And you choose. You must decide which of those you want. And that was very difficult for us to get, by the way. It was very hard to get. They wanted to decide. And we said, no, the claimant must decide. So it'll be your option, and you can then go and negotiate that solution. The one that was developed, that's a compensation claim. You know, I've only given you a small part of the story. You will know that it's even more complicated. The owners of Alex lodged a claim with the Land Commission, and they gave every claimant 50,000 rand. And they said, you've now been compensated. And unfortunately, the claimants signed an agreement, probably you included, saying in full and final settlement. What had happened is it was explained to the claimants by, and I won't name a well-known politician who you probably know who I'm talking about, led you to believe that it was compensation for lost rent. If you're bearing in mind that these people have lost rent, which they were getting from 1968. So now they said to you, we're going to give you 50,000 rand in full and final settlement of the claim for lost rental, which is what you thought was being paid. Their lawyers had written it was a catch to trap you. Now they try to argue that you've been compensated and you signed away your claim. 50,000 rand for a property taken in 1968. It's now worth 2, 3, 4, 500,000 rand. So we argued with them that this is a farce and a fraud, and you have to regard that as not even adequate compensation for lost rent, but certainly not compensation for the land. It's now been signed, so that's history. But that's just another part of the puzzle. You cannot believe how complicated some of these things are. Each situation is unique, and that's why it's been such a long haul for us, and why we thought Alex was, I said to FNB, why Alex? I mean, can't we do the low-hanging fruit first? Can't we do the easy ones? Alex is the most difficult. And they said, if you can do Alex, you can do everywhere. That's in the model for the rest of the country, and I think we've done it. So I can help you.
Okay, no.
I want to make a suggestion.
Yes.
I'm very generous with Leon's time. Giving him a ring, he'll speak to you. He won't charge you for his time, but he'll make you buy one of these titles.
Sorry, can I just see how many? I think 1, 2, 3, and then I think we'll call it a day. Anybody else? 1, 2, 3, and I'll call it a day then. Okay. Sorry, 1, 2.
I think it's a very
media allowed to.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that this is a very wonderful initiative, but what bugs me is a little bit on, the once you are in the fortress, right? You kind of have a roof over your head. but you are protected from your creditors, given the financial literacy within the black community, so to say. And then once you open up, now you have a title. You stand the risk of being targeted, or not necessarily targeted. It's just that the horror of your past decisions tends to follow you. Then you stand the risk of losing a roof over your head. The question is, in how much diligence do you go into assessing the person's financial risk of owning the property, without taking away from the greatness of this is that just that risk. Because if I was a financier and I find out that somebody who owes me now literally has got a legitimate claim to property, I'm going to go for it because I want to.
I'm going to let these other guys answer, but funny enough, our experience, and we discussed with F&B, is that that's not correct. They wouldn't go for somebody with a 100,000 rand house. They may go for somebody with a 100 million rand house, not a 100,000 rand house. It would just cost too much. They would assess their risk, and if some guy owed them money, they wouldn't go and foreclose on the basis of that he'd have to sell his house. And I'm not a banker also, so okay.
I just think what you touched on is it's a very thorny issue that we have. We're giving title, and we don't have. Sorry, I'm making noises. We don't have the ability to educate. We don't have the capacity to educate. But what has happened is that we got a booklet that Human Settlements issued on what title means, the obligations, the advantages, the pitfalls. We've reworked this, and with every title deed that you get an envelope, and in it there's the title deed, and the front page has got who the sponsor is, who the conveyancer was, and who the person is who has the title. And included in it is a booklet that gives you information about your title, about what your title means to you. Now, it's not a solution by any manner of means. We had somebody on board who was going to do education, and we haven't had it. The banks, to me, have slipped up badly in not providing this kind of education, even training their front, like I explained to you, their front loan people to ask the right questions. And the other thing that we mustn't forget is that we think people are ignorant. People are not ignorant. They work, and in Ngwathe in particular, these people built these houses with their own money. They know exactly what their risks are. And they are so scared. The biggest thing to them is that now nobody can take it away from them, and they're not going to make debt. I'm not saying their child, when they inherit it, is not going to make debt. It's a different story. They've got no skin in the game. But when you talk about education, we've got a problem. Yes, and we're trying to address it, but we don't have the capacity.
Can I just add? I think it's a very important point to raise. The problem and I think it's real. In other words, I think we're going to see some hard luck stories. The question is, do you therefore not do it? I mean, that's the catch. So my take on this is just give everyone a title deed. A certain percentage of them are going to be an issue. Helen Ziller raised these concerns with us as a reason not to do it. Now, I think, do you really want to be in South Africa 10, 20, 30, 50 years from now with black people still not being landowners? You can't educate everyone, you can't help everyone. There are debt counselling services that the government offers, the National Credit Regulator, etc. But my view is, if 9 out of 10 are a good story and 1 is a problem, that's just the risk we have to run. And I don't think one can not do it because of that, but I fully acknowledge there are going to be some unfortunate experiences. Helen Ziller made it when she said, what about, and this when she was mayor before Patricia de Louw, what about people who sell and become homeless and indigent again and waste money or whatever? My answer to her was, for everyone who sells, there's someone who's bought. It's not as if the place is now empty. There's a person who's willing to invest the money, who's willing to pay the rates, who's willing to improve the property, and that's what we should celebrate. What we do with the person who's no longer the owner, and maybe a hard luck story, let's find a way of dealing with that, but that's not an excuse for not titling. Titling must proceed, and we must find a way of dealing with the challenges.
By the way, in science they talk about the precautionary principle. Have you come across that? And the guys who are gung-ho about precautionary principles don't want to do anything, because there's nothing in life that doesn't have a problem. So we shouldn't have cars, because cars have accidents. And it just suddenly struck me that maybe this could be applied to this same thing now, is that something's going to go wrong. If you've got people involved, something's going to go wrong. Hopefully it's less than 1 in 10, which is 10%. Hopefully it's 1 in 100 that it's 1%. But we're pretty convinced it'll be nominal. And when this gentleman over here gives us money for our research, we'll do it for you. Otherwise, I think it was you and then...
my domestic is Zambisa, and she was born in a house. Her mother died. The property went to the aunt. There was a problem. Now it's gone back to the council. What sort of a problems would that be? And could she actually, she's living in the house with her brother. What sort of problems would that be to get the property into her name correctly?
Give you his email address.
Can I talk to you later?
Okay, fine. Yeah.
The problem, incidentally, is dealing with these one-on-one issues.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying we can't, but it's very difficult with limited resources to try and deal with them. But Perry's, as you is 24/7, so maybe on the 25th hour one day he'll give you some help. It was this lady here at the time.
Oh, yeah. So I'm interested
Sorry, carry on.
there needs analysis thereof. I just want to find out, what have you found to be a trend in terms of course you are also challenging the fact that black people don't know what to do with land. What have you been finding to be what they actually equate the value of land to? Is it business, is it settlement, the mere fact that they need to have housing in the land that they live on, or do they want to go into agriculture? Do they want to start businesses? And if, for example, is agriculture, given the fact that we don't, for some schools in the country, we don't have agriculture as the main module, so to say, in the curriculum, what sort of support do you give them further in terms of making sure that they get what they want to achieve with that land? I don't know if that's a lengthy question, but yeah.
I don't know if Leon or Perry want to answer. We don't give any support other than helping with the transferring the property into their name. I don't know whether we've emphasized one thing, and that the sponsors' money goes to help indigent poor people. If we think somebody can support themselves, we don't do that. What we are trying to do more and more now is to get those people who can support themselves to do so. So you've heard that Perry says there are 40 already, and that's without anything. We've got another little pilot study that we're going to introduce soon. We're going to take a few hundred houses in one area and drop pamphlets off there maybe every month for 3 months and monitor that to see if we get some return on that. I'm hoping that research we did some years ago, which says that 30% of the people who pay for themselves will be correct. So that if we've got another 12,000 to do in Ngwathe or in Tumhali, that means 3,500, 4,000 people would become owners in a matter of years, and we won't have to do it. We'll just facilitate it. But in terms of when that person gets their house, we don't have the resources or the research ability to follow up with that house. We're going to try and take a few photographs and show befores and afters and so on. But in a way, in my own mind, that's more to get sponsors rather than really to understand if there's a problem or not. Because I just don't believe that there's a problem. I'm happy to get onto any stage and argue that there's no problem in transferring a house that's owned by the council into the current tenant's name.
Can I just say, I don't want to be dishonest. We have not done any such research, and we don't think it's necessary. I don't, for example, want to go and research in Bryanston and ask white homeowners in Bryanston, increasing numbers of black homeowners, of course, as well, but say, why do you want to be an owner? Do you want to be an owner because you can raise money or get education, or you feel secure, or it just feels nice, or whatever? So again, I guess my answer is why people want to own their land. I think it's some kind of innate instinct or impulse. I think it's a desire. Now you can try and make it economic, you can try and make it social, you can try and say it's about security, you can say the one story which he didn't tell in the moving way he told me originally was that Maria Matupi, who got her property at 100, she was wheeled in a wheelchair, and I think it was Christo Visa was the one who did her title. And she wept. And one of the journalists like you over there asked her, why does it mean so much to you? And the subtext was, at your age, does it matter? You're going to die soon anyway, why does it matter? They didn't put it that bluntly. And she said, with tears in her eyes, I can now die with dignity and I've got something to leave my grandchildren. And she went on to say, I've lived here for 50 years and I've never been secure, now I'm secure. So what she was saying is it's a whole lot of psychological stuff. It's a whole lot of feelings of dignity. I think dignity is a very big one.
Yeah. That was Mrs. Koloti, it wasn't Mrs. Matupi.
Oh, well then, you're spoiling my story.
She died last year.
She's the one who died.
She was 94 years old.
94, okay. And
You know what I'm
died,
gonna-
and she died with dignity, in her words.
In her own home.
Yeah.
It was owned by
Just by
her.
the way, what I think that I'm going to say to you, have a chat with Perry, and if you've got a few hours and you're prepared to take down, drive down to Tomahali and do something, he'd be delighted to show you around and maybe meet some of these people, and you can get, one-on-one. One-on-one. At the behind you, at the.
Terry, thanks. What I'm seeing in terms of your program, which is great, it's freehold, self-standing houses. I'm looking to say, what are you looking at in terms of this wave that we've got of 3-story walk-ups and multiple dwellings, in terms of the social housing programs that are now going through the process? Because there you're starting to possibly look at a sectional title type of thing, and to try and get ahead of that way that we don't have this backlog that 10, 20 years down the line we're now trying to address that. So as the people are moving into the social housing, is to actually start giving those title deed programs some cause and effect to actually get ahead of that wave. And are you thinking in that way, or should we not be thinking in that way?
No, but we're going to have
looking at
coffee, you and I,
densifying
we're going to
the
think
cities.
about that. No, seriously, one of the problems we face is that at the moment when people get RDB houses, they have an 8-year store. 8-year preemptive clause. So you get a house, but you're not allowed to sell it for 8 years. So they sell it in under 8 years. They have to sell it a little bit on the black market and so on. We're trying to get rid of that clause to make it freehold completely. There's a mindset which Leon has touched on about people who don't want to give blacks the same rights as whites, and we cannot understand that. And I think maybe we should, if you know of some people that we can talk to and try and convince them that we're just creating more and more problems in the future. Yeah, I think it's absolutely right.
Well, I think we need to talk. We don't want to make it worse.
Yeah.
Perry, I think you've done a magnificent job over the past 3 years, made some dramatic progress. Unless we can duplicate Perry 40 times, you're going to pedantically move on with this. Isn't there a way, with the goodwill that you've been able to establish with, let's say, the mayor of Ngwathe, for her to say, let's transfer all property currently owned by the municipality with a stroke of a pen? People that object, or if there's problems, we'll deal with that, but let's transfer the property and then we will deal with the fallout where the problems are. Wouldn't that be a much quicker, much more effective solution? And if we can duplicate that through the 240 municipalities, we will have solved the problem within a year.
Our only problem is things need to be registered and they cost money. Somebody has to finance it. Even if the conveyancers, understand that the conveyancers that would normally charge 67,000 rand per transaction are doing this for 1,140 rand VAT inclusive.
Oh, you just add it to the debt of the property. So you add that 2,000 to the debt of the property, transfer the properties, get rid of it from the government point of view, and move on.
There would have to be a cash flow somewhere, and that's our problem.
I guess I'm a bit more optimistic than you, Charles, because of that graph over there. Now, I admit it's not going to happen in a year, but it does strike me that it... Oh, what have I done now? You know, we were discussing here what's going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years. Then we had ideas that, oh, maybe we'd get to 20,000 in 4 or 5 years. I mean, that's a bit unrealistic. But that's a hell of a graph. I mean, you go to any business and you say, look at what I've done over here, you know, I'm growing like hell. I don't know what's going to happen in the next year. We're just going to, I agree with you, we're going to try and, but I mean, maybe in a couple of years' time you will be able to clone Perry. The science is coming up there. But things are happening, you know. One of the things is that he's actually now, in some cases, transferring the workload onto the local authority. I mean, Perez is quite a good example. There's a lady who used to work for us, Jeanette was her name, and then she got a better offer and was asked to be employed by the local authority. But she's doing the same work in the local authority that she was doing outside of it. So, Perry, is it fair to say that as a result now you spend less time than you would have if I don't know?
Well, I like to call it our new business model, Charles. Is that we're transferring the load, and once we've got the system set up, like in Stellenbosch, we don't do anything anymore, and in Cape Town we do very little because we know what we have to do. Graaff-Reinet, we've got to establish the model. And in Ngwathe, I don't have to do much. I had problems, yes, that's what I do. And we open up new areas. But if you know, Eustace would phone me up when we had 300 done. He says, Perry, if I give you another 500, what's going to happen? Bring them, let's see. You can see where we are now. And we're still here. So there's a way of tackling it. Give us the money, we'll do it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I think we should call it a day or an evening. And you've seen, if you know how where the forms to get the to buy a title. Okay, thank you very much.